Welcome back to The Tactical Leader, where I give you the exact scripts and psychological frameworks you need for the tough employee conversations that keep you up at night. Today, we're tackling one of the most frustrating situations any founder faces: the employee who gets defensive the moment you bring up their performance. You try to give feedback, and suddenly they're making excuses, pointing fingers, or shutting down completely, and nothing actually gets resolved. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what's happening in their brain, why your current approach is triggering this reaction, and the exact 4-step framework you can use to finally have this conversation without it turning into a standoff. Let's start. Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon and you've been putting off this conversation for 2 weeks now. You finally schedule a one-on-one with your sales manager, Daniel, because the numbers haven't been hitting their targets for the third month in a row. You sit down and you open with what you think is a fair, calm observation. Daniel, I want to talk about the sales numbers. We are 22% below target this quarter. And before you even finish the sentence, you can see it happening. His jaw tightens, his arms cross, and he says, "Look, I've been working my hardest. The leads coming in from marketing are garbage. The pricing isn't competitive. My hands are tied. And now you have two choices in front of you. You can push back and say, 'Daniel, that's not the point,' and watch this escalate into a full argument where nothing gets solved and he walks out feeling disrespected. Or you can back off, say something vague like, 'Okay, let's look at the leads,' and watch the same conversation replay itself in 6 more weeks. Neither option fixes anything. And what's eating at you isn't just the numbers. It's that you genuinely can't tell if Daniel has a real performance problem or if you're just a terrible communicator. And that uncertainty is maddening. You've probably had some version of this conversation more than once, with more than one employee. And every time it ends the same way, with unresolved tension and a problem that just keeps growing. If that sounds familiar, stay with me, because everything about this changes today. Here's what's actually running through your head in that moment when Daniel crosses his arms. You're thinking, if I push harder, he's going to feel attacked and check out emotionally, or maybe even start looking for another job. But if I let this slide, I'm basically telling him that missing targets is acceptable, and the team watches me do that. And if I try to be understanding, I feel like I'm making excuses for poor performance and undermining my own authority as a leader. So you're stuck in this triangle of bad options, and every exit seems to cost you something important. Now multiply that feeling across your team. Because the truth is, Daniel isn't the only one. You've got the engineer who explains away every bug, the operations person who always has a reason why the process failed, the account manager who never quite takes ownership of a lost client. Defensiveness isn't one employee's personality quirk. It's a pattern you're dealing with across the board, and it's quietly draining your leadership confidence. What makes it worse is that you know you're a reasonable person. You're not screaming or threatening people. You're coming to the table with data, with patience, with good intentions, and somehow you still trigger this reaction. So either these employees are all difficult by nature, or something about the way you're approaching these conversations is activating something you don't fully understand yet. I want you to sit with that second possibility for a moment, because that's where the answer actually lives. Let me tell you what's actually going wrong in these conversations, and I want to be direct with you here. The problem is not that your employees are childish or fragile or difficult people to manage. The problem is that you're using a feedback approach that is designed at a psychological level to produce exactly the reaction you're getting. Most founders give feedback like this. They state the problem, then they wait for the employee to acknowledge it and commit to fixing it. The numbers are down. What are you going to do about it? The deadline was missed. Why did that happen? The client complained. What went wrong? These questions sound reasonable. They sound professional even. But to the person sitting across from you, every single one of those sentences contains a hidden accusation. And the moment someone feels accused, their brain stops thinking about solutions and starts thinking about survival. You're not getting defensiveness because Daniel is a bad employee. You're getting defensiveness because your feedback approach is triggering a threat response. And a brain in threat mode cannot problem solve. That's the core issue. And once you understand it at that level, the fix becomes much clearer. Here's what I want you to hold on to as we go through the rest of this. Defensiveness is not a character flaw. It's a nervous system event. And once you know how to work with someone's nervous system instead of against it, these conversations completely change. Let's talk about what is literally happening inside your employee's brain when you bring up a performance issue. There's a part of the brain, the amygdala, that is wired to scan for threats constantly and automatically. It does this faster than the conscious mind can register, and its job is to protect you from danger. Now, in the wild, danger looks like a predator. In the modern workplace, danger looks like your boss implying that you failed. The moment Daniel hears the sales numbers are 22% below target, his amygdala doesn't hear data. It hears you are failing, your position is threatened, your competence is being questioned in front of someone who has power over your income and your career. And it fires off a threat response, the exact same system that would kick in if he were being physically attacked. That threat response has three settings: fight, flee, or freeze. Fight looks like, that's not my fault, the leads are bad, the pricing is off, I've been working twice as hard as anyone here. Flee looks like, yeah, okay, I hear you, and then he goes silent and mentally checks out of the conversation. Freeze looks like he nods along, but nothing changes because his brain was never actually processing what you said. You've probably seen all three of these, and none of them feel good from your side of the table. Here's the critical insight: Daniel is not choosing to be difficult. His brain is running a protection program that was installed long before he ever worked for you. Probably from a childhood experience of being criticized, from a previous boss who weaponized feedback, from a school system that treated mistakes as moral failures. You inherited someone's nervous system history, and until you know how to work around it, you're going to keep having this same conversation. So now you know what's happening psychologically. But here's what makes this so hard to solve. The way most founders respond to defensiveness actually makes it worse. When Daniel gets defensive, your instinct is probably to clarify your intentions. You say something like, I'm not blaming you, I'm just looking at the facts. Or, I'm on your side here, I'm just trying to help. That sounds logical, but here's why it doesn't work. By the time Daniel is in defensive mode, he isn't processing logic anymore. His threat system is running the show, and it doesn't respond to reassurances about intentions. It responds to changes in the emotional climate of the conversation. Telling someone, I'm not attacking you, while they feel attacked, is like trying to tell someone to calm down. It almost never produces calm. The second mistake founders make is doubling down on the evidence. Look, I have the numbers right here. This is factual. The target was 100 calls. You made 67. And again, this sounds reasonable to you, but to Daniel, more evidence feels like more prosecution. Every additional data point his brain receives just confirms the threat is real and it's getting bigger. The third mistake, and this one is the most counterintuitive, is premature problem solving. You go straight to, okay, so what's the plan going forward, before the emotional charge of the conversation has been resolved. Daniel can't build a plan with you when his nervous system is still in threat mode. He'll nod along to whatever you say and then go back to doing exactly what he was doing before, because the real conversation never actually happened. So the entire standard feedback playbook, state the issue, provide evidence, ask for a plan, is built on the assumption that the other person is in a calm, logical, collaborative headspace. And when someone is defensive, they're not. That's the trap. Before I walk you through the exact framework, I want to take 30 seconds here. If you're finding this useful and want tactical scripts like these for real leadership conversations every single week, hit subscribe to The Tactical Leader. Every video I put out is built around one specific challenge, one psychological framework, and the exact words you can use tomorrow morning. Alright, let's get into the solution you've been waiting for. Here's what shifts when you approach this conversation differently. Instead of trying to convince Daniel that there's a problem, your first job becomes creating the psychological conditions where Daniel can actually engage with the truth himself. Instead of presenting evidence that his nervous system reads as prosecution, you're removing the threat so his brain can come back online. Instead of walking into the room as the person delivering a verdict, you walk in as the person trying to solve a shared problem. And here's what that produces. Daniel stops defending and starts thinking. He stops attributing everything to outside factors and starts looking honestly at his own role in the situation. He stops treating you like an adversary and starts treating you like someone who actually has his back. This isn't soft leadership. This is strategic leadership. The best CEOs don't get compliance through pressure. They get genuine ownership through understanding. And understanding is something you can engineer into the conversation with the right framework. That framework is what I'm going to teach you right now. I call this the D.A.R.E framework. 4 steps that take your employee from defensive to accountable in a single conversation. D is for disarm. You remove the threat before the conversation even starts. A is for acknowledge. You validate what's real in their experience before you get to your agenda. R is for reveal. You surface the real issue together, not by delivering a verdict. E is for engage. You co-create the path forward so they own the solution. These 4 steps work because they align with how the human brain actually works under pressure, not how we wish it would work. And the beautiful thing about this framework is that it doesn't require you to be softer or to lower your standards. It requires you to be smarter about the order in which you say things and the exact words you choose. Let me walk you through each step with the exact scripts you use. Step 1 is disarm, and it happens before you even get to the feedback itself. Most founders open a performance conversation by stating the problem immediately. And as we talked about, that immediately activates the threat response. Instead, you open by establishing psychological safety. You signal to the employee that this conversation is not an attack. Here's the exact script for the disarm step. You say, Daniel, I appreciate you making time for this. I want to be upfront with you. I'm not here to criticize you or make you feel like you're in trouble. I genuinely want us to look at what's happening together and figure out the best path forward. And I want your honest perspective on it. That's it. That's your opening. Now, why does this work? Because you've just answered the question that was running on a loop in Daniel's brain from the moment he saw this meeting on his calendar. Am I in trouble? Is this an attack? Do I need to defend myself? You answered those questions before he had to ask them. His threat system gets the signal. This is safe. You can think here. The disarm doesn't mean you're pretending the problem doesn't exist. You're simply delaying the moment you name it until Daniel's brain is ready to hear it. One more important thing. The disarm only works if you mean it. If you walk into this conversation with your verdict already written in your head and you're just performing safety to manipulate him into agreeing with you, he will feel that, and the whole framework collapses. You have to actually be curious, actually be open to understanding his experience before you deliver your take. Step 2 is acknowledge, and this is where most leaders get uncomfortable because it feels like you're validating excuses. You're not. Let me explain what you're actually doing. When Daniel says the leads are bad and the pricing isn't competitive, there may be 0% truth in that, or there may be 30% truth, or 80% truth. You don't actually know yet. And neither does he in a clear-headed way, because he's still in threat mode. The acknowledge step is where you find whatever is legitimately true in his perspective and name it out loud before you move to your agenda. Here's the exact script. You know, you've mentioned the lead quality and the pricing before, and I want to make sure I'm not dismissing that. Walk me through what you're seeing on your end. What specifically about the leads feels like it's creating a ceiling for you? And then you actually listen. Not to formulate your counter argument, not to wait for your turn to speak. You actually try to understand what's real in his experience. Here's why this is so powerful. When someone feels heard, genuinely heard, the threat response starts to de-escalate. The amygdala backs off. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles logic, accountability, and problem solving, comes back online. In most cases, when you actually listen to what's underneath the defensiveness, one of two things happens. Either you discover there is a real systemic issue you didn't know about, which means the conversation just got incredibly valuable for both of you. Or Daniel, in the process of explaining himself to someone who isn't attacking him, starts to hear his own excuses and recognize them for what they are. You didn't have to call them excuses. He got there himself. Step 3 is reveal, and this is where you bring in the reality of the situation. But you do it as a shared discovery, not a delivered verdict. At this point in the conversation, Daniel's threat response has de-escalated. He's been heard. He feels like you're genuinely curious rather than prosecutorial. Now you can bring in the data. Here's the exact script. I appreciate you walking me through that. I want to share what I'm seeing from my side, and I'd love to hear how it looks from yours. Looking at the numbers across the last 3 months, we are tracking about 22% below target. And when I look at the specific breakdown, call volume, conversion rates, average deal size, I want to understand together which of these is actually the constraint we need to fix. Notice what you're not doing. You're not saying you missed your targets. You're saying we are tracking below target and I want to understand together. The language of shared problem solving rather than individual blame keeps the threat system quiet. And now something remarkable often happens. Daniel stops defending and starts actually analyzing the problem with you. He might say, honestly, the call volume is fine, but I'm struggling with conversion on the second call. And now you have a real conversation, a productive one. The reveal step is where you finally name the gap. But you frame it as a puzzle you're solving together, not a punishment you're delivering. Step 4 is engage, and this is where you make sure the accountability is his, not yours. This is the step most founders accidentally skip. They do all the right work in steps 1 through 3, and then they end the conversation by saying something like, okay, so here's what I think we should do going forward. And the moment you do that, you've just taken ownership of a problem that should belong to Daniel. Instead, here's the exact script for the engage step. Based on what we've just talked through, what do you think needs to change to move those conversion numbers? And what would you need from me to make that possible? 2 questions. That's it. The first question asks Daniel to own the solution. The second question signals that you're a resource, not just an evaluator, and that distinction matters enormously to how engaged he'll feel going forward. When Daniel answers those 2 questions, you've done something that most leaders never achieve. You've gotten your employee to commit to a plan that he came up with himself in a conversation where he felt understood rather than attacked. That commitment sticks. It sticks because he owns it. And he owns it because you built the conversation in a way that gave him room to think clearly. Now, let me tell you 3 mistakes I see founders make when they try to use this framework. Mistake 1. They rush through the acknowledge step. They say, I hear you, but, and then immediately pivot to their agenda. The word but erases everything before it. If Daniel hears, I hear you, but the numbers are still down, his brain processes that as, I don't actually hear you. Take more time in the acknowledge step than feels comfortable. Real listening feels slow. That's the point. Mistake 2. They use reveal as an opportunity to prove their case. You don't need to win this conversation. You need the problem to get solved. The moment you start stacking evidence to back Daniel into a corner, you've reactivated the threat response and undone everything the first 2 steps built. Mistake 3. They skip to engage before the real issue has been surfaced. You can't co-create a solution to a problem that hasn't been honestly named yet. If you rush to, so what's the plan, while Daniel is still feeling partly defensive, he'll give you a plan that sounds good in the room and means nothing by Monday morning. The D.A.R.E framework only works when you go through every step in order and you genuinely commit to each one. You can't fake disarm. You can't fake acknowledge. If you're using this as a manipulation tactic, employees will smell it and you lose far more trust than if you just had a blunt conversation. Use this because you actually want to understand. Use this because you actually believe the best in your people. If you bring that energy into it, the framework does the rest. Let me paint you a picture of what your one-on-ones look like 6 months from now if you start using this approach consistently. Daniel doesn't walk into feedback conversations brace for an attack anymore. He walks in knowing that you're going to actually listen to him, that you're going to look at the problem together, and that you'll co-create a real solution rather than having a verdict handed down. So when there is a performance gap, he tells you about it early, before it becomes a crisis. Because the conversation isn't something he's dreading. Your other team members start to notice too. Not because you announced some new leadership philosophy, but because the energy in your one-on-ones is different. People leave those conversations feeling challenged and respected, which is a combination that produces genuine effort rather than surface level compliance. You spend less time in conflict, less time having the same unresolved conversation over and over, and more time actually moving things forward. And here's something else that happens, something you might not expect. Your authority actually grows. Not because you became tougher or more demanding, because your team realized that you're the kind of leader who can handle hard conversations without losing composure, who wants to understand before judging, and who holds the standard while still treating people like adults. That's the leader people don't want to leave. That's the culture that top performers choose to stay in. I want to leave you with one thing you'll remember the next time you walk into a difficult conversation. Defensiveness is never about you. It's about fear. Your employee isn't fighting you. They're fighting the version of this conversation their nervous system predicted. The one where they get blamed, where they look incompetent, where they lose your trust. Your job as a leader isn't to push through that fear. Your job is to make it unnecessary. When you remove the threat, you get the person, not the defense mechanism. And the person, given the chance to think clearly and feel respected, almost always wants to solve the problem just as much as you do. That's what the D.A.R.E framework gives you. Not just a better conversation, a different relationship with your team. One built on trust that compounds over time. Defensiveness is fear. Your leadership is the answer to it. That's the framework you need to handle your next feedback conversation without it turning into a standoff. So let's bring it all together. The next time your employee gets defensive, don't push harder and don't back down either. Use the D.A.R.E framework. Disarm first. Signal that this is a safe conversation, not an attack. Acknowledge what's real in their perspective. Actually listen before you move to your agenda. Reveal the gap together. Bring in the data as a shared puzzle, not a verdict you're delivering. And engage their ownership. Ask them what needs to change and what they need from you. 4 steps, 1 conversation. A completely different result. Now here's what I want you to do right now. Before you close this video, think of the one employee you've been avoiding a difficult conversation with. Maybe it's been 3 weeks. Maybe it's been 3 months. Write down their name and schedule that conversation for this week. You now have the framework. You have the exact scripts. You know what's happening in their brain and why. The only thing left is to actually have the conversation. That's what separates the leaders who read about this stuff from the ones who actually build great teams. If this video gave you something real, subscribe to the Tactical Leader. I drop a new script and framework every single week built around the exact situations you're dealing with right now. And if you have a specific employee challenge you want me to cover, drop it in the comments. The best videos on this channel come from real problems real founders are facing. Until next time, you've got this.